Amongst watch enthusiasts, there's a select few watches that they absolutely love, that they adore, and no harm can be done by these select group of watches. But my question is why? What makes them so special? And in this video, we're going to find out. Welcome back to the Chisholm Hunter channel. My name is Harrison, as always. And on this cold winter's night, we're going to bring to you tons of watches that enthusiasts just absolutely love. And we're going to be telling you the reason why. And we're going to start with number one, which is a brilliant brand in Tag Heuer. Tag Heuer have kind of been going through a transformational period in the industry recently, and they're really focusing in on their COSC certified movements, which is unreal. But prior to that, they had a little bit of a stigma around them, which I personally don't agree with. But there was one watch that nobody could flaw, and that is the Tag Heuer glass box. Introduced in 1963, the Heuer Carrera chronograph marked a brand new era for Heuer watches. Now remember that Tag and Heuer were two separate brands before they merged together, making Tag Heuer. 3 years after this, Heuer released the Carrera model Dato 12 with a date window at the 12 o'clock mark. However, in 1968, the date was then relocated again to the 9 o'clock mark at the expense of a running second subdial. And this was opposite the 45-minute chronograph counter. And this kind of icon with the Dato chronograph is now retained on the dial of the new Tag Heuer Carrera glassbox model. This is a model with tons of history. This is a model with vintage vibes thrown in there, and it really tells the story of Tag Heuer, or at that point, it was Heuer. And I think that's why watch snobs and watch enthusiasts like myself absolutely love it. Never mind the fact you can see into the back of this watch, the dial color is unreal. The fact that it comes 39 millimeters is just the unicorn size for everyone. There's so much going for this watch that watch enthusiasts just struggle to find something wrong with it. And I think the reason is because there isn't anything wrong with it. Before we get on to the next watch, if you could do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button to help a fellow watch nerd out, I'd really appreciate it. Up next, we have the Casio G-Shock Casio with the model number GA-2100. But why does everyone favor this Casio G-Shock over other Casio G-Shocks? What's wrong with them and what's right with this one? Well, everyone knows of the AP Royal Oak, the Vacheron Constantin 222 or overseas, the Patek Philippe Nautilus, the 70s inspired Genta stuff that not many people can afford. So to get a Casio G-Shock that is nigh on indestructible for around about $300, £280, with this design that looks rather similar to a Royal Oak, that is pretty damn awesome. Not to mention Casio watches, G-Shock watches are fun. They're something that everyone have in their collection. And also, they're extremely affordable. They're very hard to flaw because you have a watch that can last a lifetime, literally be run over by a car, and your wallet isn't screaming at you quite as loud as it would with an AP Royal Oak. The GA-2100 was introduced in 2019, and it keeps the DNA of G-Shock, but also kind of draws all those similarities from the, Royal Oak and all that kind of stuff. Casios and G-Shocks are just very well respected in the industry. I mean, you see so many celebrities literally wearing Casios. It's actually become a statement to wear a Casio or a Casio G-Shock amongst the watch collecting community, especially when it comes to celeb status. I mean, everybody knows that celebs can afford these unattainable watches to most people, including myself. But it kind of brings them back to reality. It brings them back to earth when they wear these brilliant, affordable watches. And that's why these watches can't be flawed, and enthusiasts just love them. And the next watch, and the reason I'm laughing is because there's not really much I can say about this apart from it's unbelievable. It is the Casio F9 1W, a watch that costs £10 that gets everybody enthusiastic and excited and into the industry. When you think back to university, when you think back to college, when you think back to school, the odds are your first watch was a Casio or a G-Shock. And the reason being is they're cheap, cheerful, and unbelievable. And that's pretty much all I can say about this watch. It's unflawable because of the price. Next on the list, we have another 70s inspired design, but we have a rather affordable watch for being 70s inspired and also having an automatic movement from a Swiss brand. When we think of the 1970s in the watch industry, we think Vacheron 222, we think Patek Philippe Nautilus, and AP Royal Oak, all of which are, as I said before, just totally unattainable. But in 1978, Tissot released the first PRX model. A model that was sleek, stylish, 70s inspired, but most of all, a model that was affordable to most people. A couple of years ago, PRX relaunched these PRX models and it blew up. It literally blew up. And now there's every iteration of every size interpretation of every color that you can think of in the Tissot PRX models, and purely because of the popularity. When it comes to a less expensive brand like Tissot, they typically release more watches based on what's popular. If the PRX is popular, all of a sudden you'll have tons of different variants of the PRX coming up. And that's partially because people in the industry at that price can get multiples of the same watch. I mean, you're not going to get an AP Royal Oak and then buy 3 others just because they have different colored dials. It's a lot more considered of a purchase. The Tissot PRX takes everything that we love about the watch industry and makes it affordable. And I think that's why everybody loves it. Not to mention the Powermatic 80 movement, which is a powerhouse of a movement. Oh, and by the way, if you want any watches that enthusiasts really love, then I heard that Chisholm Hunter was a really good place to get your next luxury watch. And now we are rewinding to 1965 when the moon watch first came to be. And in 1969 when we had that mission to the moon, when we landed on the moon watch was worn. The specific reference of the watch that was actually worn on the moon is ST105.012, and this had the 321 caliber, a caliber which has since rocketed into fame. And if you have a watch with this caliber, and it's a real watch, that's a given, it is worth a hell of a lot of money because of the amount of collectors that want this model. Since these watches landed on the moon, there's been tons of new iterations of the Omega Speedmaster. There's been ones with Hesselite crystal, there's been ones with sapphire crystal glass, different dial colors, and all the rest of it. Limited editions, blah, 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 blah. But why are they so well respected? Well, I think it's a couple of reasons. One, strip away the moon landing. It's still a bloody sexy watch. I would argue that it would still be just as popular, maybe a little bit less popular, but it'd still be very, very popular without the moon landings. Secondly, to have the testing and the functionality to make it to the moon and come back, that's ridiculous. And thirdly, the mechanics inside are just jaw-dropping. And if you were to get a Speedmaster today, it would be COSC and METAS certified within that beautiful manual wound movement. And fourth, and finally, you have the sentimental connection that people have to the lunar landings. A lot of people, including my parents, watched the lunar landings. They had a huge party around the lunar landings. It was such a worldwide phenomenon that people have a really sentimental link to that watch. The next watch on the list that enthusiasts just love is actually inspired by a tank. Yes, you heard me. In 1917, Louise Cartier wanted to make a watch that was much more masculine than anything else on the market. And when we look at the tank, masculinity isn't the first thing that pops to mind. But back then, this was extremely masculine. Now, at the point of this design, the First World War was actually still raging on. And at the point of him designing this watch, the most masculine thing that he could think of was a tank. Specifically, it was the FT-17 tank. You can't write this stuff. Since the initial launch of the tank, that literally tank-inspired watch, it's gone through hundreds of variations, hundreds of iterations, and they all actually, well, nowadays we consider them more dressy, but they all look very Cartier. I would argue that this is the most popular watch in Cartier's range because it just fits every aesthetic, especially when it comes to dress. Having a Cartier in gold is what you would wear on your wedding day. It's just got so much history packed into that watch. Next up, we have a watch from the king in the watch industry that encapsulates adventure just perfectly. This is the Rolex Explorer. The Rolex Explorer first originated after the first successful expedition to Mount Everest in 1953. This was essentially designed as Rolex's adventure watch, as their explorer's watch, if you want to say that. But I think in creating this watch, they did so much more than just create an adventure watch. They created a perfect hybrid that could be worn anywhere with anything. And they created an absolute icon in the industry. Since its inception, the Rolex Explorer has continuously kind of led the way in the realm of watch design, and there's so many copycats through the industry. In 1956, Rolex introduced the caliber 1030 movement to the Explorer, and this was brilliantly accurate. This watch was then replaced by the adoption of the twin lock crown mechanism in the 1960s, which enhanced the watch's water resistance and all-round ruggedness in an outdoors adventure guy's watch. When most people look at the Explorer at first glance and don't know the history behind it, they think, well, it's a little bit boring. But it's when you figure out what this watch can actually do, what it has done, that you realize how brilliant it is. Moving on to Tudor, and of course the Tudor Black Bay. Now there's no secrets in the industry when it comes to who founded both of these companies. Hans Wilsdorf, the man himself that founded Rolex, also founded Tudor. The company was founded in 1926, and Tudor has been it seems to me, long overshadowed by Rolex. But within the last 5 years, around about 5 years, Tudor has gone from strength to strength and now has a total new identity and is also one of the most popular watches in the industry. And to move up the ranks that quick, you can only do that when you have a brilliant product to hand. The original Tudor Submariner is something that it's a dream watch of mine to get that because it has so much history. And what you see in the industry is whenever Tudor bring out the Black Bay range, which is directly inspired from the Submariner, everybody loses their minds because of the innovation that comes into play. They've actually introduced COSC and METAS certified movements for under £4,000 in, for example, the new Black Bay monochrome. That is something that nobody else can do, and it's just an unbelievable feat for a brand at this price. There is no denying that Tudor, when it comes to price and quality, are leading the way, and that's partially why watch enthusiasts love it. Tudor is a brand that can be that little bit more flexible than Rolex. They can bring out stuff that's that little bit more fun. For example, a big example of this is the Tudor Black Bay Pro. That watch is so fun to me, and it's something that you just never see Rolex doing because they kind of tweak tiny little colors and they move a lot slower than Tudor. And maybe because of that fun flair kind of injected into Tudor, that's what's got all the eyes on them, but that's a different story. People in the industry love Tudor, and I think that's partially why. The next watches on the list are Grand Seiko watches. And actually, I'd go into the Elegance collection here, specifically the Snowflake. And I think part of the reason, or actually all of the reason that people fell in love with this Japanese brand in the first place is one, the dials, the execution on the dials, the depth on the dials, unbelievable. No one can do a dial like Grand Seiko. They are the king in the industry of dials. Secondly, we have the finishing. The polishing on Grand Seiko watches is nothing like I've ever seen before. And actually, some of the polishing is actually an ancient technique that they used to use on samurai swords. And to bring that history into the watch, that is crazy. But thirdly, we have innovation. The spring drive movement, a combination, a hybrid between a mechanical automatic movement and a quartz movement, splicing the two together to make this hybrid baby. Now, I've explained this in other videos in more detail, but I think the combination of these three things have made Grand Seiko be very respected in the industry. They have beautiful finishing, beautiful movements, beautiful dial textures, and that has earned them a reputation. And that has also earned them a really loyal fan base. It's actually quite funny. If you say anything against Grand Seiko, like anything at all, the Grand Seiko fans go absolutely ballistic, and I love it. The first spring drive movement, a little bit of history for you, was actually released in 1997. Would you look at that? The same year I was born. In 1976, we had the birth of the Patek Philippe Nautilus, a watch that is at the top of everyone's radar, or most people's radar nowadays. It's part of the Holy Trinity. It's actually probably the top of the Holy Trinity. Actually, no, it's not the top. I'd say probably Vacheron's the top, but it's in the Holy Trinity. The Nautilus of 1967 was the Jumbo Ref 3700/1A. This had hours, minutes, and a date at 3 o'clock. And the reason that this was known as Jumbo is due to its generous case size of 40mm. But actually, it wasn't really 40mm because ear to ear on the Nautiluses, you have kind of two ears sticking out. It was more around the 42mm. Gerald Genta, the man himself, actually designed this watch as well as the AP Royal Oak. And that's partially, I mean, his name carries a lot of weight in the industry. It carries a lot of gravitas because he was so ahead of his time. These watches, AP Royal Oaks, Patek Philippe Nautiluses, Vacheron 222s, they were considered kind of weird. They were. They were considered odd. They didn't make very many of them. They were just a little bit funky until people realized. It was almost like making a Tesla in 1970s. People would be like, what the hell is that? But now they realize the expertise, they realize the brilliance. Since the launch of the Patek Philippe Nautilus, it has gradually gained more and more popularity, and now it is one of the most popular watches in the world. Problem being is you can't really get them. They don't make enough watches to fulfill the demand. But in a weird, kind of screwed up way, I think that makes more people want them purely because they can't get them. I mean, it's kind of like the Rolex effect. And I think that's partially why people just love Pateks. It's the whole ethos around the brand. A Patek isn't to own, it's to pass down to the next generation. And I love that because my watch collection at the moment, it will be passed down to the next generation. And those watches will be around long after I'm gone. And that's quite it's a nice thought. Next on the list, we have the Hamilton Murph. Yes, you guys heard me, the Murph. A watch that every enthusiast, no matter who you are, absolutely loves, because who doesn't love the Interstellar film released in 2014? Honestly, one of my favorite films to this day. Now, Hamilton have a really close relationship with Hollywood and with Christopher Nolan, who actually directed Interstellar. And the Interstellar watch, the Murph watch, was used as literally the pinnacle of, it was the key to this whole story of the movie. Now, the original Murph watch actually had Eureka on the second hand of the watch and had a leather black strap. But since then, they've actually slimmed the case size down and also released different dial variations, a white and a black, if you want to go for them. They've made it a little bit more palatable for the watch industry, getting that little bit smaller. However, the reason why people love these watches so much is because of Hamilton's response to the community. Hamilton actively listen to their community. And I was actually with Vivian Chauffeur, the CEO of Hamilton, who's a bit of an action man himself. He's a really cool guy. And we spoke in depth about how he listens to the industry and how he actively looks as to what we want as the collectors and makes those changes. And Hamilton are a brand that get their marketing done brilliantly. They feed into the adventure element. They feed into the Hollywood films element. And it's brilliant to see the brand the way they are. They're moving from stride to stride. They're moving up in the kind of scope of the watch world. And they're a brand that I absolutely love. I absolutely love Hamilton. I actually have to. Actually, I don't have it on. Typical, I don't have it on. I actually got my khaki field mechanical back from repair. So I've been wearing that the last couple of weeks. And it's nice to have it back. It's been gone for I think I sent it off 3 months ago, but it's been broken for a year. And the next watches on the list are the IWC Big Pilots. Now, you could say Big Pilots, or you could go for the Mark collection, because they're a little bit more palatable again, because they aren't as big. But let's just talk about the Big Pilot. The history of the IWC Aviators watches started in the Special Pilot's Watch Reference 436, now widely known as the Mark 1X. This watch was unveiled in 1936, and the sons of the owners were both licensed pilots and understood the features required for a great pilot's watch, resulting in the style that is now kind of at the core of IWC Big Pilot. It is at the core of what the Big Pilot represents. I've literally got a Big Pilot clock on the wall. You see that massive onion crown? Well, that's because when pilots had their gloves on, they couldn't have a little small crown that they couldn't pull out. They needed something big because they had thick gloves on. So they created the onion crown. So everything you see on that pilot's watch is built for a purpose. And I like that. In 1948 onwards, the RAF IWC Mark 11 was the highest spec precise wristwatch for aviators, powered by the chronometer grade Cal 89. The Mark 11 was such a brilliant performer that the RAF kept it in service until 1984. Now, since all this kind of stuff happened in the history books, the IWC Pilots collection have changed with the times. You still have the Big Pilot, but they have introduced the more palatable Mark series, which are a little bit smaller, a little bit more dainty, and a lot more wearable. But they still have the core of IWC's DNA running through them. And I think that's a common theme in the watches that I've mentioned in this video. It's the purpose aspect. If your watch has a purpose, then nobody can flaw it because they know it's used for something. And I think that's what makes watch enthusiasts and watch collectors love these watches. And that's all from me today. If you do enjoy these videos, please hit that subscribe button or follow our Instagram at Chisholm Hunter Watches, or my Instagram at HB Lifelens, or the Into the Mind podcast, which is my very own personal podcast. And I'll see you guys real soon.